there are going to be at least 2 variants of FPAS Mark II. One where there's very, very high levels of individual accountability of each board member and so on. And a second version, which looks more like conventional inflation forecast targeting central banks like the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. So they have a board that operates and communicates by consensus. So they don't have a lot of individuals speaking their own mind. They speak as a group. Okay. Another example would be my home country, the Bank of Canada, or the Riksbank, or the Norges Bank, and so on. So there's going to be 2 variants, at least 2 variants to FPAS Mark II, and that's going to be really important because when you hear some of the discussion, you'll have to ask, are they talking about the first variant, where there's tons of individual accountability, or are they talking about the second version, where basically you have a board that's just acting as a group and therefore almost impossible to hold any individual board member accountable for anything with regard to monetary policy and so on. So it's going to turn out, from this morning, we in the discussion with Armin, we talked about the folly in baselines and local approximations or linearizing models and so on. And so we said, well, obviously, if you eliminate that folly, things must be easier, right? I mean, if we're not fundamentally in the business of folly, then you would say, if local approximations and baselines are folly, that somehow, obviously, if we just eliminate the folly in what we're doing, things must be easier, right? I mean, otherwise we'd be saying that we're in the business of folly. And I don't think we'd want to say that we're in the business of folly, would we? Okay, so the other question is the business about local approximations, or assuming that the economy is linear, okay, and then based on that assumption about linearity, taking some model and asking, what does the model say? Okay, and you can see that this quote right here is very much against that kind of idea of taking and building some econometric model. I don't care which econometric model it is, but just some model and asking the question, what does the model say, and expecting that we would get a sensible policy coming out of that question. So this wonderful quote by, I'd rather have Bob Solow than an econometric model, but I'd rather have Bob Solow with an econometric model than without one. What does he mean? What do we think he means by this? What might he mean by this? Like in terms of things that are relevant, for our work. Well, just separate the sentence into 2 parts. Okay, let's consider the second part. I'd rather have Bob Solow with an econometric model than without one. And so you might say, well, that means that let's assume Bob Solow is a world famous macroeconomist, which he is. Okay, so that's what we mean by Bob Solow. I'd rather have a world famous macroeconomist than an econometric model, but I'd rather have a world famous macroeconomist with an econometric model. Okay, so it's sort of implied that we need the model, as a little bit more structure than just what's in the head of Bob Solow. Okay, so we need Bob Solow, we need the great macroeconomist, but we also need to have some discipline. We need to know what kind of model he's thinking about the economy with. Okay, so that would be my interpretation. I'd rather have Bob Solow than an econometric model. I think what Stan means is I don't even want an econometric model unless I got Bob Solow, because the answers are so are so nonsensical. We need to have Bob Solow before we do anything. Now, so the argument up to this point, okay, I've said that if there's a folly in local approximations and baselines, if we eliminate the folly, things must be easy or easier, okay? But now I've told you, you need Bob Solow, and that might not be so easy to basically get a Bob Solow, because there aren't very many Bob Solows out there. So the question is, can we do anything else, or is it hopeless? Because the quote seems to sound like we actually need a Bob Solow, and that might be difficult. So my talk today is a little bit about FPAS Mark II and what we need to do to effectively train people, okay, to act as if they've got a bunch of Bob Solows in the institution. Now, it's going to turn out that, and this is an inspiration by Jacqueline, okay? This is the person that's always in the cafeteria who talks about things like a dynamic learning environment that runs the Fab Lab at the bottom of the mountain. And what Jacqueline, as well as a number of educators throughout the world, are finding is that we learn much better in a dynamic learning environment, okay? And so one aspect of getting the 24 Solos, or Bob Solows, is going to be able to get a dynamic learning environment to increase our productivity. Maybe not up to the level of Bob Solow, but as high as it needs to be able to implement FPAS Mark II. In the design of the framework, we have come up with a system, partly in consultation with people here, everyone, but particularly Hike to my right. We've come up with this configuration where we have a 24-person team split into 4 groups of 6. Okay, so we've got, you think of 5 people on the outside with a team leader. Okay, notice there's no division A, division B, division C, or division D. There's no head of division A, head of division B, or head of division C. And part of the reason for this will become clear once we realize that this thing has to exploit the talent that we have at any particular point in time to get the tasks done that are necessary for implementing FPAS Mark II, okay? And so this dynamic learning environment is going to be very important. Now, what do they do? Well, one aspect of this dynamic learning environment in this configuration is to produce 4 quarterly projection exercises a year, including 4 monetary policy reports that are connected to these 4 quarterly projections. And each one of these projections is going to be run extremely efficiently. Okay, it will be even more efficient under FPAS Mark II than FPAS Mark I for the reasons that we indicated earlier, that it eliminates some of the folly in baselines and local approximations and gets us to focus more squarely on the issues that policymakers actually care about. Okay, obviously then by helping them deliberate better, that will also help them to communicate better. Okay, so what do they actually do? So in this case, we've come up with a 28-day policy-making process. T is the policy decision and communication. That means a monetary policy report that is written up to the standard of the best in the world, which at this point we think is the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. Is that possible? Very possible. And the reason is that the Reserve Bank of New Zealand does this with less resources than what we are going to be putting into this exercise. So if we didn't do it at least as well as the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, then there would be an issue. Okay. Okay, so it's a 28-day schedule. Why 28 days? Focus. Did somebody say focus? Yes. 28 days is a pretty long time to focus on anything. And one of my experiences has been that if you allow this system to develop, especially if you allow untrained people into it, there is always going to be somebody at the end of this exercise that's going to say, I need more time. And as soon as you increase the time, as soon as you allow even more untrained people into the process, they will then ask for even more time. And what will actually happen, so I love your response. What's your name, by the way? Sure. I loved your response, because what happens is that then all the other people that are involved in the process are not going to be taking it seriously until basically the deadlines start getting closer and closer and closer. So you've effectively wasted an enormous amount of time where you've taken exercise where people really need to focus. And once it's designed that way, think of the opportunities for dealing better with things like work-life balance issues. Okay, so in the system that we proposed here, we will see approximately 50% males, females. In the current system, where people have implemented FPAS Mark I, you do not see a lot of females in that system. And part of the reason is that in the early stages of this exercise, it requires not just 1 month 4 times a year, but if it takes 2 months 4 times a year, that's 8 months. And some of that 8 months is going to be related to folly and stress and overtime and unnecessary nonsense in the person's life. And that means that they won't have very much time to basically focus on maybe things that they care about. For example, like spending time with their family and so on. So this argument, by the way, is not just related to males and females. It's based on any male or any female that basically happens to want a life outside of work and not to be chained to a process where they have to invest massive amounts of time and commitment for a very long period throughout the year. Okay, so 28 days, focus. I hadn't even thought about that word, but I think I like it better than any other word that I can come up with. Okay, now this is all, by the way, been designed with consultation with the board. Okay, so we've actually started to go through the process of doing this, the first part of the process going from T28 up to T17. And so just let me talk about the very first part of the process. So the very first thing that we have to understand here is that there's no baseline anymore. What there is a case A and a case B scenario that is produced every quarterly projection. In the case A scenario, we look at market conditions, or what the expected path of the Fed funds rate is. If that is going up to a particular number like 5%, we construct a case A scenario where the Fed funds rate would have to go up to a higher number, maybe 6%. So if the market was expecting that interest rates had to rise to 5%, in the next few months or 6 months or whatever, our case A scenario would be one where there would be inflationary pressures that would require higher interest rates than whatever is in the market. And so the case A scenarios are meant to get at the idea that the world could unfold in various ways. And one could be that underlying inflation could end up being stickier than what's currently priced into financial markets. Okay, so that's our case A scenario. Case B scenario is just a situation where inflation, good news, the labor market cools down all by itself, consumption slows, a recession is created that's just the right magnitude so that we no longer require interest rates to be as high as what is expected in financial markets. Okay, and so what this does by getting the policymakers to think about what the potential ingredients could be in case A and case B is that there's lots of case A's and case B's. There might be a case A for board member one and a case B for board member one. And that might be different than the case A and the case B of other board members because they might think about the world differently. And in fact, in a framework where you're asking for high levels of individual accountability, you were asking for the highest levels of policy making. And so get the idea that the policymakers would be thinking about the ingredients of case A's and case B's is of utmost concern. It is the essence of what monetary policy making is all about. Now, of course, we have the issue of what is the likelihood of various case A's and case B's, which we argue at this point in our knowledge is better thought of as being unquantified, something where judgment is brought to bear about whether or not you think the case A scenarios that require higher interest rates are more likely than the case B scenarios that require less interest rates, less higher interest rates in the future. Okay, so the idea that basically you get the board to sit down, in this case, with two level 2 GFS coordinators. So these would be people that would be very experienced in terms of understanding what FPAS Mark II is. So they sit down with the board members and then they help the board members craft a one-page narrative of their favorite case A and case B scenarios. Okay, so each board member goes through this process with these two level 2 GFS coordinators. The coordinators are bilingual. Okay, there's no more translation anymore between one language, the home language and English. Both the English and the Armenian version of the monetary policy report are drafted concurrently, as well as all documentation that's required as a part of the process for doing this quarterly projection exercise. Okay, so from T28 all the way up to T17, we go through this process of trying to create these one-page documents by each board members that would then be submitted at T-17. Those documents would be used as critical input by the chief economist. So the chief economist is the person that is responsible for organizing the staff and producing a state-of-the-art monetary policy report. Again, FPAS Mark II monetary policy report. So in that FPAS Mark II monetary policy report that would be published at time T, we would have examples of case A and case B scenarios. They would not be all of the case A and case B scenarios, but out of the submissions of all the board members, so again, all 8 of them would submit their ingredients for case A and case Bs, the chief economist would then choose an illustrative case A and case B that he could use to communicate or help communicate the monetary policy making process in the central bank. So in addition to case A and case B scenarios, we have case X and case Y scenarios. Case X and Y scenarios are tail risk-like scenarios that will be obviously used when it is important to illustrate that monetary policy is not just about achieving for the best outcome, but it's about least regrets policies where you try to avoid the worst possible situations, or what Olivier Blanchard refers to as avoiding dark corners where danger lurks. So let me go back to T-minus 28 to what we call the kickoff meeting. That is composed of a concise briefing to the board about current economic drivers. Now, this system assumes that there's a regular weekly reporting system to the board. And so the purpose of this meeting is not to give them a long presentation of the data and the implications of the data, because the board will have been studying the implications of the data and discussing that almost on a continuous basis every week. And so this kickoff meeting is more about the organization of this specific quarterly projection exercise and monetary policy report. So that's why we emphasize the word concise briefing to the board about current economic drivers. More importantly, the purpose of the meeting is to have a robust discussion between board members and the staff about major concerns and tail risks. Okay, so the objective after that meeting is then to go to work with the level 2 GFS coordinators and to construct these one-page submissions that would have the ingredients that each board member would be thinking about if he were to think by himself about these case A and these case B scenarios. Same thing goes for things like tail risk scenarios, like case X scenarios. We are going to be going through this later in the presentation, assuming that we get to that point today. We possibly might cover it a bit tomorrow if we don't get there. So we're going to be going through examples of what we mean by these scenarios. We've been publishing them in this document called Not the Teal Book, so you can actually go to that document and see what we mean by case A, case B, and case X scenarios. The point that I'm trying to get you to focus on here is more about the organization and what it means for us as economists and managers in this FPAS Mark II framework. So what we're asking for here, you'll notice that once we get to that T-minus 14, we have the issues meeting. And at the issues meeting, we then get direction from the chief economist based on the chief economist after he's looked at all the submissions by each one of the board members. He would then inform everyone about what his plans are to construct this illustrative case A and case B scenario, as well as whether or not there's a case X and potentially case Y scenario that is required. So at this point in the issues meeting, everybody on the board will have a mental picture. So there will not be any quantitative estimates at this point, but people will have a mental image of what case A and case B might look like, knowing that they don't have to agree with case A and case B or any of the ingredients in them, They have to, hopefully, it has to be relevant to the world that they're thinking about. But of course, it doesn't have to incorporate any specific board members' views about case A and case B, because that documentation can always be published, because you could always publish the one-pagers that are submitted the previous week. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that then the construction of the case A, the case B, and the case X scenarios can proceed very systematically. It looks like it's being constructed over 11 days here, because at T-3, we lock in all those scenarios. But in reality, we actually lose a couple of days because of administrative things and checking and so on. And so this amounts to 9 days of projection rounds, meaning that somebody's going to have to work on the weekend. But buying into working on the weekend one day means that you're going to have a lot more flexibility in your work life the rest of the year. So this is important, that we're creating a process, okay, that from the very beginning is being designed to be incredibly efficient, where we don't waste any time doing things that are unnecessary, that we focus on, specific objectives. Okay, so what is a dynamic learning environment? So we're looking at a little bit about what a dynamic learning environment is. This is Angela, okay? Angela used to work at the statistics department at the Central Bank of Armenia, and has become one of our superstars in our dynamic learning environment. What is a superstar? A superstar is someone that has some strengths in some things and has some weaknesses in some things. Part of the commitment to change and becoming a superstar is recognizing that you have some weaknesses and being very visible about what those weaknesses are. It's a part of the whole commitment to excellence, that you acknowledge what those weaknesses are and you work with people on a day-to-day basis, fixing those weaknesses. So we have this thing called a one-pager. Everyone in the Global Forecasting School gets one. It has 4 little bubbles there. The first bubble is presenting. It turns out that Angela has a natural gift at presentation. Why is that? She's a musician. Many people that are musicians usually have to overcome things like shyness. You're a performer. This is what a presenter does. He's trying to capture the people's imagination and so on. She's also very good at critical thinking and creativity, okay? But she has some things to work on, such as economic modeling. She's not Bob Solo, but she recognizes, of course, that she's not Bob Solo. This is a part of what being in a dynamic learning environment is. The other part of, and most important part about being in a dynamic learning environment is that you don't think of the world. You don't think of the world as something where there's a boss, and the boss basically is transmitting information to you, telling you what to do. Instead, we take your strengths and sometimes we put you in the middle. So if we need to have a presentation done and we want to do a really good job at the presentation, we're probably not going to pick the worst person at doing presentations. We might pick the best person at doing presentations, and we might put them in the middle. Just like if we're talking about modeling, we might put HiCAS in the middle. So HiCAS is another person that is committed to the Global Forecasting School and excellence. His strengths are in economic modeling, critical thinking, but he's got some things on the bottom presenting and writing that he wants to work on. And so obviously, if we need to have a job, or we need to get the job done, we're going to use HiCast for modeling, and we're going to use Angela for presenting. But now we still have to write up the monetary policy report. So this is where Vahe comes in. The Chinese call this is better than this is better than 24 Bob Solos. This is taking a bunch of people that have strengths in particular areas and trying to combine them together into teams. And the idea is that by picking the people in the right teams, you can generate very, very high levels of productivity. Okay, so I just wanted to say that when we then think about this, so think about now a team that is composed of all the relevant skills. Okay, so think of that as Team A. So now Team A can go in and can produce the forecast. All we need is 6 people. So then the question becomes, why do we need 24? If we can get 6 people to do the entire thing by choosing the people with the right skills, why would we need 24? Well, we have to provide a work environment where we're going to be able to sustainably get 6 people to be able to do this. And I think if you offered a job to 6 people and said, you're the only 6 people that we need to do this job, that would be a very risky way of basically running any system, but especially FPAS Mark II. And so the idea that we're asking people to buy into here is that by working in a dynamic learning environment, okay, we should be able to push human capital development to a much higher level than it's being pushed in any central bank in the world, okay? Simply by thinking about what all the objectives are, developing a training program specifically to satisfy those objectives, and by organizing this process in a way that allows you to do it. So what would, case A is responsible for the projection, the first projection of the year. Team B is responsible for the second projection. Team C, the third. Team D, the fourth. I just want you guys to guess, what would the other teams be doing? So if Team A is doing the projection this time, what might Team B and Team C and Team D be doing? What might they be doing? Learning. Learning to do what? Learning to do the next projection. So it would be quite natural if the whole schedule is mapped out. And if you were on Team B and you knew that you'd be doing the projection next time, then you'd be, and you're trying to do the best job that you can do, then you would be learning, preparing to do the projection next time. Well, that's Team B. We still have a problem. We still have, what are we going to do with Team C and, Team D? I guess they'll be learning too, but they don't have to be learning to do the projection next time because Team B is going to be, so what will they be learning about?
Satellite teams. I mean, they will help or support in other projects.
So they will help and they will support in other projects. But rather than think of them as being responsible for specific tasks, for example, they will have world-class expertise in current analysis, in modeling, in anything that's relevant for monetary policy. And obviously, as people that are world-class in those areas, they will be thinking about things and they will welcome the opportunity to participate with Team A that's currently putting the projection together as someone that provides some input. In other words, maybe some analysis that they've done on current analysis on, some topic that they're considered to be an expert in. Or they could also be providing some support in terms of coaching some new people that are currently doing the projection this time or preparing to do the projection next time. So that's perfect. But the key word is learning. So the way to think about this is that if you're not currently doing the projection, at least 80% of your time is on learning. Okay, either learning to produce better projections in the future or learning to develop basically, a more human capital, which of course the rest of the system is going to be using. Okay. Now, excellent. So do you get? I think you probably have enough of the basic idea of what we're trying to do here. Okay. Does anyone? Okay, so how do we do it? We created this thing called the Global Forecasting School, okay, which means that if you can go on our website, the Better Policy Project website, you can see information about what the Global Forecasting School is, or you can talk to people like Anahit or Vahe or Angela and ask them, what it's like to do this. When you go into the Global Forecasting School, you can be tested up to 5 times a week. Okay. Now you might want to ask yourself, why would you want to be tested up to 5 times a week? The reason that you want to be tested is that you need to get up to a level 1 to participate in this FPAS Mark II system. And not only do you have to get up to level 1, but you only have 1 year to do it. And not only do you have to get up to level 1, you then have another year to get up to level 2, and then level 3 and level 4 and level 6. Okay. Now, what do you think happens after 6 years? You have to leave. You have to leave. Okay. Why would you have to leave? The reason you have to leave after 6 years, okay, in this system is that you have to make way for new people, okay? Because for it to be a dynamic learning environment, we need to have young people come in and also basically, propagate the system so that it's, that it becomes better and better and better over time. So each level, okay, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, level 6, to get level 1, you will have to go through a lot of testing. You have to score 10 interviews, okay, that are 10. So our grading system is 10. You have to achieve 10 in 3 types of activities. One is interviews. And so that's, we give you a question and you get 5 to 7 minutes when you're videotaped to provide an answer that has to score 10, okay? And when that answer scores 10, you get a tick. You have to get 10 ticks on interviewing questions to get to level 1. That's twice a week. You have the opportunity of taking that test on Mondays and Wednesdays. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're given a question and you get 60 minutes to basically draft a 1 to 2 page document that is up to the standards of producing the monetary policy report at the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. So in other words, we're not talking about a standard that is, it exists. It is done by undergraduate students at the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. And so to test people to make sure that they're up to that level, okay, they have to do 10 of those. And again, they have to score 10. Finally, on Fridays, which we always call Feedback Fridays, this is not feedback like scolding people for how badly they did during the week. Think of this more as a celebration for all the progress that everybody on the team has made working in this dynamic learning environment. That's what we mean by feedback. But on Fridays, we give people a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, and they have to do that presentation up to a level 10 again. So again, you need 10 interviews scored at 10, you need 10 1 to 2 pagers scored at 10, and you need 10 presentations scored at 10. When you satisfy those objectives, the only other objectives that you require for level 1 is AMPM1 and AMPM2, which are basic knowledge macro courses.